Welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways, Coyote visiting the zoo. This is a zoo video. Well, it's not about the zoo. It's about abundance, actually, and doomerism to some extent. But it's taking place at a zoo. You can hear the lemurs that you can maybe see on the island in front of you. They're making noise. You're also going to hear some jets because the zoo is under the flight path for Sky Harbor, the Phoenix airport. You got to have the flight path somewhere, and this is one of the areas. It's actually a pretty neat area. It's a very large and comfortable zoo. So we're going to do a video here. I've recently run into a huge problem with people, and I say problem, but a huge tendency of people to really, really latch on to a negative doom and gloom point of view. And when you point out things that are going well, or abundance, or things that have been a benefit, things that have improved over the past couple centuries or even 20 years in human existence, they deny it, or they say that it's all going to collapse, or that it's all very fragile, or there's always some doom. And this is actually more widespread than I really imagined. You get into it with ideologies. There's a lot of equity or equality or racism or something. There's a lot of ideologies that say that someone is a threat to you. It seems to be the big movement to control people and keep them negative right now, is to have some ideology that everyone can subscribe to. Pick one where you are being threatened by others. That's the whole basis of they're all called phobias now, right? Transphobia, genderphobia, homophobia, immigrant phobia. You know, it's always a phobia from one side. That's kind of an interesting thing. You know, but bigotry, racism, whatever it is, there's this idea that you are being threatened. And you will hear much more multiple orders of magnitude more about the threat than you ever will any evidence of someone acting in a way that is threatening. You know, someone will come up with an example or an excuse or something that is perceived as being a threat. You know, someone says the wrong word in a speech and it's doom. It's going to cause all the trans people to be murdered or something, right? Someone says the wrong thing about immigration and it means that the borders are going to go away and all of the people in the U.S. are going to be murdered by human traffickers. It goes both ways, right? It's all sides of the equation. There's this doom, this preach of doom, you know, and then you go in and you try to explain to people. People are like, well, our standard of living is going down. Everything sucks. It's horrible. And you go to people and you'd be like, look, the biggest worry you have, most Americans, the biggest worry you have might be choosing the brand of the food you buy, choosing the brand of the phone you buy, choosing whether or not to subscribe to a 15th video service or a 17th service. These are not, you know, people bitch about personally owned vehicles. There's a huge thread going on right now, argument about cars. You know, if you could get delivery, if you could get all the stuff, would you get rid of the car? Because it's just a money pit and horrible and awful. And there's no sense of freedom to it. You know, there's this perception that the car, automobiles, personally owned vehicles, transportation does nothing for you, doesn't provide you with any positives. It's all negatives and it's forced on you by society. And it has nothing to do with being able to go places, go hiking, travel, do things on your own schedule. It has nothing to do with freedom. It only has to do with negatives. And this is just so many topics, so much stuff. Now, I happen to be very in favor of personally owned vehicles because I think that travel, the ability to get the fuck out, movement, freedom of movement is a core, one of the 5 or 7 core human freedoms that we developed with, that we literally evolved with, okay? The stuff that goes all the way back as our brains developed out of, animal space. But they can only see negatives. And then there's there's always a problem. There's always something that's going to collapse. You can point out that starvation globally has been pretty much kicked. Peter Zion's death, doom, and gloom predictions aside, and he does warn of dangers that are possible, but he doesn't actually, none of this is laws of nature. None of this is stuff that has to happen. You can always shift and adapt. Brazil doesn't have traditional soil, so growing cereal crops without imported fertilizer really sucks. However, they can raise a lot of cattle. If you consider meat to be food, the problem goes away. Stuff like that. Sorry, that's kind of one of those distractions. It is important, though. People have a lot of reasons why the collapse is imminent. And it never actually is. 50 years ago, when I was a kid, say 45 years ago, as long ago as I can remember the topics. Okay, I felt 45 years ago, I was 7, I was literally reading about global starvation and the United Nations and weird stuff. Early reader, and I went through the nonfiction age-appropriate section of the library pretty much completely. And I know that some of it wasn't good information, but there's a kind of a broad sense of stuff. People literally starved to death from famine. Like, there was no way to get them food. There was nothing available. There was no solution when I was a kid. That doesn't happen anymore. That literally no structural reason for any starvation on the planet at this point. If you do find a starvation incident, it's caused by political actors using force. Okay, you go back to when I was involved with Africa in the 90s. You had Somali warlords would take the food and hold it and starve people. Okay, that's political. It's not a structural starvation. That's political starvation. And there's no structural starvation. The world can be fed. And, people talk about this because they need the negative. I don't know why. They're programmed to need the negative. Starvation in America has never been a huge problem. And it has gone to the point where it is literally a couple handfuls of people every year who die of starvation. It's so few that you can find an outlying reason for each one. Some guy goes into the wilderness and starves to death because he got snowed in and didn't have any food. Some crazy people starve their kids in the basement. Something horrible like that. Like, it's such an outlier thing. And it is just a couple handfuls of people every year. It's so out there that it's just not a problem. So we create new problems. We create the idea of food insecurity. We create the idea that there is a huge problem because you don't have food choice, because you don't get to pick the New Zealand imported orange in June. That you are somehow like being devastated mentally, socially, spiritually, whatever. If you have to rely on some sort of food budget, you can only afford this food, not that food, then there's something wrong, right? That is how far it has gone. It has gone so far into this abundance of stuff. Okay, and I'm not saying abundance economics. I'm not saying everything's free, all right? But we have gotten to the point where the poorest people in America get to complain that they can't pick which brand of canned green beans or bread or Twinkies or like which variety of corn they get to buy. That's crazy. And most of the world, honestly, isn't that far off. There is difference. But we talk about the end of the world if you can't pick from 17 brands of bread. Imagine that. Just stop for a moment and imagine what that means. The people are under stress. The standard of living in America is sinking. All the doom and gloomers. It's when I was a kid, we moved once, and we had to wait several weeks to get a phone line turned on because the telecommunications companies, Ma Bell, had a certain number of lines, certain areas they had to build out. You couldn't just get a phone. You did not actually get a phone. You had to lease a phone from the company, and you had to wait for it to be available. This was before the Ma Bell stores in the mall where they would have special designer phones. Okay, this is the old classic handset. This is like mid-70s. We had to wait a couple weeks to get a phone. Now, if my pocket computer that has telephone capabilities falls into the water and breaks, I can get a new one in minutes, couple hours max. If I have a specific one I want with super capabilities, I may have to wait 3 days for shipping. And most, not all, but the vast majority of Americans can do that. Okay? Yes, there's the bottom 20% that are going to have to deal with a $49 prepaid Walmart straight talk phone if they lose theirs and whatever. But think about that. Just think about the wealth of choice and abundance that you have. And people think that it is horrible and awful and doom because they might have to wait for an upgrade, or because they only have 5, 10, 15 streaming services, and they're not sure if they can afford a 16th streaming service at $20 a month. If you take a look at an actual standard of living, what does it take to live a middle-class 1980s lifestyle right now? Just 1980s. We're not talking 1930s. We're just going right back to when I was in high school. It is far cheaper as percentage of income than you can imagine. It's way cheaper than 1980s middle class is the top 85, maybe 90% of America. Like, there's stuff that you have, the stuff that you spend money on, the stuff that you stress about is so unnecessary. It's great. It's fun. Get it if you want it. If you want 16 streaming services, more power to you. I think they're a waste of attention and mental capacity, but it's fun for you. Do it. But understand that your expectations don't mean that the world is doomed. It's just that you have these expectations. You have a wealth of choices, an insane wealth of choices, from jobs to leisure to just everything. And people are so overwhelmed with the choices, they think the world is going to end because they can't have something else. It's a really weird program. I haven't got it all figured out. I know that people are being programmed. I know that there is an overarching set of programs put in place by people who want power over you, security in their scarcity or control of resources. There's a whole host of reasons. And people are programming you to want what you can't have and to feel insecure with what you do have. It's not a natural human state. That's not a natural human psychology. It's very much programmed into you. It's not who you are at the core. So, what's all the doom for? What's all the doom and gloom for? Oh, it's in the environment this time. Okay, we're going to burn up the earth and everything's going to collapse. We use so few resources. All of this is about comfort, okay? 98% comfort. All right. You can go across the country on a bicycle. You can go across the country on a train. As much as I love automobiles, it's the freedom of movement that is the core element, you know? If we had inns and way stations and we were riding bikes across the country, everything would be fine. It would just take a little longer. If we were using zeppelins or blimps instead of jet planes, it would just be more comfortable and take a little longer. Okay? There's no lack of abundance here. There is a overwhelming set of options, choices. So maybe it would be healthy for you to go a little bit sideways and acknowledge that you have, honestly, an abundance of choice. Everything is going fantastic. And the people who are telling you otherwise maybe shouldn't get any attention from you. That's it. Stay sideways. Have fun.